My ex was more ambitious than you. My girlfriend said that while we were sitting on her apartment balcony on a Thursday night, I looked up from my drink. Then I said, okay. 10 weeks later, she was sitting in her car outside my house asking why I wouldn't answer her calls anymore. The answer wasn't complicated. Eventually, I stopped competing with a ghost, and reality handled the rest. My name is Tyler. I'm 34 years old. I work as a regional operations manager for a distribution company. Nothing glamorous, nothing flashy, but it pays well. I own a house, have savings, no debt besides my mortgage. My life isn't exciting enough for social media, but it works. When I met Lauren, I thought she appreciated that, at least in the beginning. Lauren was smart, driven, funny, the kind of person who could make an ordinary dinner feel interesting. For the first year, our relationship felt easy, healthy. We talked about future plans, trips, marriage, buying a place together someday, normal things. Looking back, the first warning sign appeared when Lauren started talking about her ex more often. His name was Jason. At first it seemed harmless. Everyone mentions previous relationships occasionally. The problem wasn't that she mentioned him. The problem was how she mentioned him. Every story somehow highlighted his strengths, his confidence, his ambition, his risk-taking. One evening we'd be discussing careers and she'd suddenly say, Jason would have started his own business by now. Another day she'd mention, he never played it safe. Little comments, tiny comparisons. Easy to ignore individually, hard to ignore collectively. I ignored them anyway, because that's what people do when they want peace. The second red flag arrived through Lauren's best friend, Amanda. Amanda absolutely loved Jason. Not because she dated him, because she'd built a mythology around him. According to Amanda, Jason was destined for huge success. Every conversation sounded like she was describing a future billionaire. The strange thing. Jason wasn't actually successful, at least not yet. He changed jobs constantly, started projects, quit projects, talked about businesses, rarely finished them. But Amanda loved potential, and Lauren slowly started loving it too. One Friday night we had dinner with Amanda. Halfway through the meal she brought up Jason. Again, apparently he'd launched another startup idea, the third startup idea in 2 years. Amanda looked impressed. Lauren looked impressed. I mostly felt confused, because talking about success and creating success aren't the same thing. On the drive home, Lauren said, you have to admire people who take risks. I nodded. Sometimes. Then came the follow-up. Not everybody has that mindset. I knew exactly who she meant, pretended I didn't. That became another habit. The third red flag appeared after I turned down a promotion. The promotion would have doubled my travel schedule, increased my income significantly, and eliminated most of my free time. I thought about it carefully, then declined, because I liked my life. When I told Lauren, she looked disappointed, not concerned, disappointed. You turned it down. Yeah. Why? I explained. Family, balance, quality of life. She listened quietly, then said, Jason would have taken it. The comment hit harder than she realized, or maybe exactly as hard as she intended. I laughed awkwardly, changed the subject. But something about that conversation stayed with me, because it wasn't really about the promotion. It was about comparison. Again, always comparison. Over the next few months, Jason became an invisible third person in our relationship. Not physically, mentally. Every career conversation somehow returned to him. Every future discussion somehow returned to ambition. Not my ambition. His, or at least the version Lauren imagined. The next major warning sign came during a party hosted by one of Lauren's co-workers. Most people were talking about work, investments, future plans, normal adult conversations. At one point, somebody asked what I did for a living. I answered. Then Lauren laughed. Tyler likes stability. The group smiled politely. Then she added, Jason would have hated that. The room went awkwardly quiet. I smiled, but inside something shifted, because for the first time, she wasn't comparing me privately. She was doing it publicly. Later that night, I brought it up, calmly, respectfully. Her response was immediate. Oh my God. What? It was a joke, I nodded. Okay, you're too sensitive. There it was. The beginning of another pattern. Every concern became an overreaction. Every feeling became evidence that I was the problem. Eventually, I stopped bringing things up, not because they didn't matter, because the conversations never changed anything. Then came the night everything shifted, the night that became the title of this story. Lauren and I were sitting on her balcony after dinner. The conversation somehow drifted toward careers again, future goals, success, money. Then she looked directly at me and said, "Honestly, my ex was more ambitious than you." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke, and for the first time in our relationship, I stopped making excuses for her. For a few seconds after Lauren said it, I just sat there. The city lights glowed below the balcony. Cars moved through the streets. People laughed somewhere in the distance. And all I could think about was one sentence. My ex was more ambitious than you. Not because it hurt, because it explained everything. The comparisons, the comments, the constant references, the disappointment. For months I'd been trying to understand why nothing ever seemed good enough. Now I finally knew. I wasn't competing against another man. I was competing against a fantasy, a version of Jason that barely existed. Eventually I asked, "Do you really believe that?" Lauren immediately sighed. The same sigh I'd heard every time I brought up something uncomfortable. "Oh my God. What? Why do you always focus on the negative?" I almost laughed, because apparently comparing your boyfriend to your ex wasn't negative. Questioning it was. The conversation ended shortly afterward. Neither of us seemed interested in continuing, or maybe we both knew where it would go. Nowhere. The next morning, Lauren acted like nothing had happened. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement. Just normal conversation. Coffee, breakfast, weekend plans. As if she hadn't spent the previous night telling me another man was superior. That bothered me more than the comment itself, because it showed how normal the comparison had become for her. Over the following weeks, things got worse. Not dramatically, gradually. The way most relationship problems actually happen. Jason appeared in conversations constantly, not directly, indirectly. Lauren would mention someone starting a business. Then somehow Jason would enter the discussion. She'd hear about a promotion. Then somehow Jason would enter the discussion. Everything led back to him, or at least the version of him she'd created in her head. One evening she showed me one of his social media posts. Apparently he'd launched another business venture. Again, I looked at the post, then looked at her. "You know he started two others before this one, right?" Lauren shrugged. "At least he's trying." That sentence stayed with me, because trying wasn't the same as succeeding. But somehow effort counted more than results. Potential counted more than reality. And stability counted for nothing. A few days later, Amanda became involved again, which never helped. Amanda had always encouraged Lauren's thinking, every comparison, every criticism, every unrealistic expectation. One Saturday afternoon, Lauren came home after brunch with her. The moment she walked through the door, I knew something was different. She seemed irritated, frustrated. Eventually, she sat on the couch and said, "Amanda thinks you don't challenge yourself enough." I looked up. "Amanda thinks that," Lauren nodded. Then added, "I kind of agree." The honesty surprised me, not because it was shocking, because it was finally direct. For months she'd hidden behind comparisons. Now she was saying it openly. The problem wasn't Jason, the problem was me. At least in her eyes. That night I barely slept, not because I was angry, because I was starting to see a pattern much bigger than one comment. The issue wasn't ambition. The issue wasn't success. The issue wasn't Jason. The issue was respect. If someone respects you, they don't constantly compare you to another person. If someone respects you, they don't make you compete with a memory. If someone respects you, they appreciate reality instead of chasing fantasies. That realization changed something inside me. The following week I tried having a serious conversation, not an argument, a conversation, calm, respectful, direct. I explained how the comparisons felt, how exhausting it was to constantly hear about Jason, how every discussion somehow became a measurement. For a few minutes Lauren listened, Then came the response I should have expected. "You're insecure," I blinked. "What? If you were confident? This wouldn't bother you." There it was. The gaslighting, not accountability, not understanding, deflection. The problem wasn't her behavior. The problem was my reaction to it, at least according to her. For nearly an hour we went in circles. Every concern became insecurity. Every example became overthinking. Every feeling became weakness. Eventually, I stopped talking, not because she convinced me, because I realized she wasn't listening. She was defending. And those are completely different things. Over the next several weeks, I changed, quietly, not intentionally, naturally. I stopped defending myself, stopped explaining my choices, stopped trying to prove my worth, because honestly, if 2 years together hadn't convinced her, nothing would, and strangely enough, the less I chased approval, the better I felt. The pressure started disappearing. The constant need to compete started fading. For the first time in months, I felt peaceful. Lauren noticed almost immediately. One evening she looked at me and asked, "Why have you been so distant lately?" I shrugged. "Busy, I guess." She didn't seem convinced, because deep down she knew something had changed. She just hadn't figured out what. The truth was simple. I wasn't becoming distant. I was becoming detached. And detachment is dangerous for relationships built on one person constantly chasing. Then came the conversation that ended everything. At least emotionally. We were having dinner at her apartment. The atmosphere felt tense, uncomfortable, like both of us knew something was coming. Eventually, Lauren put down her fork, then said, "If you can't handle who I am, maybe we're just not compatible." The room went quiet. A year earlier, I would have argued, explained, defended myself, tried to save the conversation. This time, I simply nodded, then said, "Okay." And for the first time since all of this started, Lauren looked genuinely afraid. When I said, "Okay," Lauren looked completely caught off guard. For a few seconds, she just stared at me, waiting, expecting an argument, a defense, a promise, something. Instead, she got silence. "What do you mean, okay?" I looked at her calmly. "If that's how you feel." Her expression changed immediately. Confusion, then concern, because for almost 2 years every disagreement had ended the same way. She criticized, I explained. She compared, I defended. She pulled away, I moved closer. The cycle always ended with me trying harder. This time it didn't, and she wasn't prepared for that. The conversation ended shortly afterward. No yelling, no dramatic exit, nothing cinematic. Just two people sitting across from each other realizing the relationship had changed. The next morning, Lauren texted me before work, then during lunch, then again that evening. At first, I thought nothing of it. Then I realized something. For months, she'd been emotionally distant. Now suddenly she wanted connection, the same connection she'd slowly stopped offering. A few days later, she called while I was having dinner with my brother. "What are you doing?" "Dinner." "Where?" I told her. There was a pause, then another question. "Who are you with?" I smiled slightly, not because I was annoyed, because the irony was impossible to miss. For months I wasn't allowed to question anything. Now she wanted details. Now she wanted reassurance. The difference, I wasn't looking for reassurance anymore, and she was. That shift changed everything. Then came karma wave one, the practical consequence. For nearly a year, Lauren had assumed we'd eventually move in together. Not officially planned, but expected. The future existed in her mind. A shared apartment, a shared life, shared plans. One Saturday afternoon, she brought it up. "So when do you think we should start looking seriously?" I looked up from my coffee. "For what?" She laughed. "An apartment." I shook my head. "I don't think that's happening." The smile disappeared immediately. "What?" "I don't think we should move in together." The room went completely silent. For the first time, consequences entered the conversation. Not emotional consequences, real ones, practical ones, the kind that can't be explained away. The kind that force reality into the room. Lauren stared at me, like she genuinely couldn't believe what she was hearing, because deep down she never expected me to leave. She expected me to improve, compete harder, prove myself, become more ambitious. but she never imagined I'd stop participating altogether. A week later, she called me crying, not dramatically, not manipulatively, genuinely upset. I don't understand what's happening. I listened quietly, then answered honestly, I think you do, because I believed she did. People usually know exactly where things started going wrong. They just don't expect consequences. Then came Karma Wave 2, the social fallout. And like most real social fallout, it happened naturally, not because I exposed Lauren, because people pay attention. Friends started noticing things. Questions appeared, plans changed, conversations happened. Eventually, the truth surfaced, not the dramatic version, the real version. The version where Lauren spent months comparing her boyfriend to her ex. The version where every accomplishment became insufficient. The version where appreciation slowly disappeared. The surprising part, most people didn't take her side. Even Amanda, at least not completely. One evening my friend Marcus called, "You hear what happened?" No. Lauren and Amanda got into a huge argument. That surprised me. Amanda practically worshipped Jason. What about? Marcus laughed. Amanda finally admitted Jason was mostly talk. I sat quietly, because that sentence mattered. For years Jason had existed as an idea, a symbol, a fantasy, but reality was finally catching up. Then came the clue, the proof. The moment everything changed, a mutual friend mentioned running into Jason. Apparently his newest business had collapsed. Again, investors left, partners walked away. The project disappeared within months, just like the previous ones. And the ones before that, the ambitious future Lauren kept comparing me to, it wasn't becoming reality. It was disappearing. Again, the irony wasn't satisfying. It was sad, because none of this was ever really about Jason. It was about what he represented: potential, fantasy, possibility, the things people imagine when they stop appreciating reality. Then came Karma Wave 3, the emotional consequence, the hardest one. About 2 months later, Lauren asked if we could meet. I agreed. We met at a coffee shop we'd visited dozens of times together. The moment she sat down, I noticed something different. No confidence, no comparisons, no criticism, just sadness. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she finally asked, "Did you ever feel like I was choosing him over you?" The question surprised me, not because it was difficult, because it was honest. I thought about it for a second, then nodded. Sometimes. The tears appeared immediately, not dramatic tears, not manipulative tears. The kind people cry when reality finally wins. For nearly an hour we talked. Honestly, more honestly than we had in a long time. Eventually, Lauren admitted something, not about me, about herself. She'd become obsessed with potential, potential careers, potential lifestyles, potential futures, and somewhere along the way she stopped appreciating what already existed. Then she said something I'll never forget. "I thought you would always keep proving yourself." There it was, the truth, the thing hiding underneath everything else. She thought my patience was permanent, my loyalty was guaranteed. My presence was automatic, and eventually that certainty made her careless, because people stop protecting things they believe they can't lose. A month later, we officially ended the relationship. Quietly, respectfully, no screaming, no revenge. No dramatic confrontation, just acceptance. The relationship had already ended long before we admitted it. We were simply acknowledging reality. The following year became one of the most peaceful years of my life. I focused on work, accepted a leadership opportunity, spent more time with family, started traveling more, built stronger friendships. Most importantly, I stopped measuring myself through someone else's expectations, and that changed everything. Almost a year later, I ran into Lauren unexpectedly. We talked for a few minutes, nothing emotional, nothing dramatic. Before leaving, she smiled sadly and said, "You know what's funny?" "What?" She looked down, then laughed softly. "I spent years admiring somebody's potential. I waited and ignored someone who actually showed up. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then we wished each other well and went our separate ways. And as I walked away, I realized something. The relationship didn't end because Lauren said her ex was more ambitious. It didn't end because of one comment, or one argument, or one bad night. It ended because of hundreds of small choices. Hundreds of moments where comparison replaced appreciation. Hundreds of times respect became conditional. That sentence didn't destroy the relationship. It simply exposed a problem that had been growing for a very long time. And once I finally saw it clearly, I stopped chasing. That's when everything changed.